I think we've got a little word cloud that captured some of your own views about what learning and education and development. So there was the conversation about the formal and the informal, and education not necessarily being schooling, that we educate both the individual and society. So you can see there's a lot of, you touched on a lot of themes. And our storytellers that we've just heard, who talked about specific ways that their programs and initiatives are opening up opportunities. Now we want to open it up and hear what you think about what you've just heard. What are the opportunities of these and other approaches? I'm just going to move it on to the next. We'll go to the next slide. But just for a moment, what are some of the things that stood out for you about the stories you've just heard? What are things that you have questions about, concerns about, you just are wondering about? Let's start with what you've heard, the 4 stories of James from Kenya, who's doing sport, the Herschelers, who are doing math education and other basic education in South Africa, and we heard from Jocelyn, and education projects in with refugee students and sponsoring more refugees, and Omar and his colleagues working in schools in Afghanistan, all with this deep connection to these places of attachment. What stood out for you? Yes, right here.
Yeah, hi, good evening. My name is Catherine. I work as a community manager in a country in West Africa. I had a question for the people that are involved in Education Without Borders. What do you do so that you don't take over the role of the government in your initiative? And how does the initiative become sustainable?
Great question.
Thank you.
And we'll just really try to touch on it briefly. And yeah, thank you.
I'll try a little bit, and then maybe Ruth will put in a comment as well. Basically, we start an after-school program, so we don't interfere with what's going on in the regular school program. So everything we do is after school. It's voluntary. It's for those students who want to attend. We sit with the teachers and the principal. We never do anything in the school without their visioning and their permission and their encouragement. And they see the fruits of what we're doing, because the kids that come to our programs go back into class and become role models to other students who then want to come. We get the community involved because they come and make the meals and feed the students in the afternoon. The government, we go and meet with governments. We don't ask them for money. We just make sure they know what we're doing.
Great points, thank you. So does that
answer
cover
your
it?
question? Okay.
Yeah, great question. Other things that stood out for you about what you heard? Do you have a specific question for one of our storytellers, or do you want to just launch into, these are questions we're putting out there as possibilities. What are the opportunities of these approaches? What are the limitations and possible challenges? What should the priorities in education be? And what can be learned from these examples and from other examples? There's many of you here too that are doing education work. Yeah, over here.
When I heard your story about beacons of hope in Afghanistan, I thought...
Could you speak up just a touch?
Sure.
Thanks. And your name, sorry.
Yeah, I forgot my name. I'm Bardi. I just graduated with MA in anthropology from Simon Fraser University. And when I heard your work in Afghanistan with Beacons of Hope, I thought, how come you pick these 3 schools or these families in particular? Like, what was a personal connection for you to pick these families over other families? Was there a community you were involved with that you picked these schools?
Well, the families actually are referrals. So we hear about their stories and we do an assessment. We go in and interview them prior to being able to support them. So we want to make sure the stories are authentic and that they're going to be committing themselves to what we require their child staying in school. So we do have a criteria that we go through and make sure that we choose people who are committed to their child's education. And as far as the schools, we do hear there are a number of schools that are deprived of, not necessarily the schools, what we help is the students. So we provide school supplies to students who otherwise may not have the pens and pencils and the notebook to be able to come to school and take notes and learn something, actually. So we directly give each student a package containing notebooks, books, school supplies such as pens, papers, etc., to be given to each student. Because what we did when we assessed, when we went in and talked to the school principals, one of the things that the schools really lacked were the basic school supplies. And that's what they recommended that we give to their students. In the future, we hope to be able to provide them with shoes, clothing, etc., because that's another barrier to their opportunity of getting an education.
Great, thank you. Any other questions or reflections on these opportunities that you've just heard? Yes, there at the back.
Hi, my name is Tanya, and I have a question for Omar. I see here that you work in the advertising and marketing industry, which is obviously very for-profit and not necessarily for social causes. Do you have any personal moral conflict with what your actual job is and the social work that you do?
Great question, Tanya. Yes, I do work in the business world, and that working in marketing or advertising industry is not necessarily a conflict, and I don't have a moral conflict that I go through working in those things. There are different purposes for each of them, and actually their support systems come from different initiatives. Being in marketing, there's big initiatives going for cause marketing and making developments in education and overall social sustainability across the globe. So actually I find these two arenas that I work with, one is a personal cause, the other one is a career choice that I have made. And I find them incredibly complementing. I'm able to take my skill sets as a professional and actually apply it to Beacon of Hope and help us grow so we can reach more than 10 families, so we can reach more than 1,500 kids with school supplies, so we can build multiple water pumps, and that's how I see it. But thank you.
Yeah, great. Yes, oh, sorry, I think there was this woman here, and then we'll come to you, okay? So yeah. Any reflections you'd like to make on what you've heard or questions that you have? Just push the button and introduce yourself. When the light comes on, you know you're live. There you go.
Thank you. My name is Margot. I currently work in cross-cultural mental health here in Vancouver, although I'm about to go abroad and work in Afghanistan. Just an observation, and that is to pick up on something someone said earlier. It seems to me that when we build on our passions and the privilege that we... Sorry. It seems to me that when we build on our passion and the privilege that we have, whether it's education or through being born in Canada or being able to come to Canada, it seems that's what's most sustainable and will bring us the drive and the energy to share that with the world. So all of us, of course, have wonderful gifts. We wouldn't be here, I would suggest, unless we didn't have those gifts. And so, you know, what feeds us really feeds the world. So I find this quite inspiring, all of the stories.
Thank you very much. And over here, sir.
Hi, my name is Amar, and I have the priorities in education has to go beyond the formal performance for tests and college admissions and so on. In most of these cases, wherever the societies have to be developed, whether it's Afghanistan, my experience is based in India, in a rural village. And it is important that non-formal education be an important part of the process of bringing about a democratic culture. And the learning at the school, the formal learning, meeting certain grades, should be running in parallel with the empowerment of the homes that they come from. Otherwise, these seeds will not take root. And we would have done our whitewash and we go away and so on. So my project, and I've spoken with you earlier about that, is essentially, it is still not a story, so I was quiet, it's simply a plot. The plot involves that whenever you are thinking about education, you have to consider 3 dimensions. One, the psyche of the community. Is the community really willing to learn? Is it capable of learning? And in that case, stop me. I look upon the community as a wideband receiver, a TV set or a radio set. And the process of learning is tuning. But there are different frequencies, and these frequencies, in many cases, where the communities are still developing, so many of these intrinsic frequencies are disabled. Social mores, treatment at home, accustomed to being oppressed, carry on, and so on. So one has to find out to what extent all these components are disabled, find it. So you got to meet with the people, you got all sorts of other things come about. So please do not think about the empowering of the school as being isolated from the mindset of the community that you're in. Otherwise, the things won't take root.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great point. Other comments, reflections? I haven't had anyone from this area. Okay, then I see right at the back, and then we'll go to Charles. So. Go ahead. And your name, please.
My name is Leon. I'm an SFU International Studies student and also doing some anthropology. And, well, one of the things as I've been listening and trying to sort of connect the stories from here and there, and I found very interesting the example from James about the sports. Why would that be so valuable? And this is just a reflection. And perhaps in sports we find the values in community, and when you're part of a team, you have a role to play, but you're not on your own. You seem to be most like team sports, so it's a lot about building ties and about relying on others and playing with others. You cannot do it on your own, mostly at least. And there's a lot of joy and happiness, but a lot of empowering in that experience. So it's a very communitarian or communal experience, an idea. Now, thinking also of cases like Jocelyn's, or also the empowering through empowering one person at a time. And one of the things I'm wondering is, are we, when we're teaching them, when we're giving these resources that often lack in these communities, are we also telling the people who we're empowering to think about why these resources are lacking? Are we also telling them that they're valuable, or are we telling them at that time that they are not valuable until they have those resources? Which I would think it would be something very opposite to the example in sports, because as soon as you're part of a team, you feel like you're valuable. But on the other side, it's like sometimes it's like until you hit those resources, you cannot do for others. But I think you can, and actually I think that happens. And I just like to finish. I think it's one of the great things is when we find examples like Jocelyn's and like in WUSC, a lot of people actually, I've seen it. They've been people who have been helped or have come here through the SRP program, and they come here and they're the ones working on that. And that's a great example. That's perhaps, then I say, okay, this is working because these are people thinking of their communities and going back, and that's perhaps it's the greatest thing. But are we teaching that as we teach them maths, or as we teach them to do this or that? Are we teaching them that they are already valuable, or are we not saying that? Are we saying the opposite? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question. I wonder if someone would like to add to that, connect that idea with what you're thinking in your approach. Yes.
Hi, my name is Patty DeSante, and what that brings up for me is the system of education. We talk a lot about the individual and empowering the individual, but we often don't talk about the system of education. And I'm really curious, and I don't have the answer to this, but looking at this question of when is the system of education a process of liberation, and when does it cross over to be a system of oppression? And, you know, this is a really important point, because I think that right now in our current culture, you ask most kids if they like going to school and they say no. They're not engaged. It's not about liberation. It's very oppressive. And yet we don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater. So I'm really curious about this edge place, exploring the edge of what is where it. So when we go and develop in other countries, what system are we bringing? Are we bringing the system of oppression? Eventually, maybe it essentially serves to liberate to some extent, and then so we teach all these kids certain skills and so forth. But then, if there's nowhere for them to go, and are we just? I'm just interested in how we move with education and exploring that edge. And I very much like that place of saying, if you don't have an education, you're not, are you not valuable? I work with street kids, and I got to tell you, they got a strong voice, and we need to hear their voice because they reject a lot of, this education. And yet the first thing we do often when we put them in these programs, we say, get an education. And maybe we need to listen to their voice as to why. What moves them to not finish school. I think this is an important voice that's not often at the table. I'm guessing probably we don't have a lot ever of that at the table. So thanks.
Great. Thanks for stirring it up. And I